I'm Nathan McCann. I'm a fisheries technician for the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council as well as the Salmon River Restoration Council, and I mainly work at the Forest Service here in Orleans. Um, I'm going to be showing you guys today the insides and out of a chinook salmon, two to be exact. During this video, I switch between a male and a female chinook salmon to just show you the slightly different parts of those two fish. Don't be jarred by that. Yeah, so the purpose of this video is really just to instruct people how to dissect a salmon and then to hopefully instruct others in the future, generally probably children in schools. Um, I would say the most important thing when trying to teach science to anyone, as well as the anatomy of a salmon, is to just get them really excited about it. The intricacies of science are really interesting to people that understand them, but it's a lot more accessible if you're just trying to show all the fun parts about science. Um, a great way to do this is to compare the fish's body to our body, because we both have bodies, but they're not exactly the same. The fish have fins, we have arms, they have gills, we have lungs. People will be able to understand that, especially when not coming from a scientific background. Yeah, and then since this video is trying to train you on how to kind of teach kids, big thing is safety. Everybody wants to be safe. We don't want to have any mishaps. The biggest thing with the dissection is that we're using a knife. They're a great tool, but they're a dangerous tool if they're in a chaotic environment. So a great thing you can do is set large boundaries to protect yourself and the students. It's important both yourself and the students are at risk if there are too many things happening at once. You need to have a good blood circle, which is the length of your arm plus the open blade. So you need to have this distance safely around you where nobody's in your zone. Nobody can actually accidentally bump you to where you might cut yourself, you might cut someone else. Make sure you set that boundary. It's really critical to the success of your dissection. Speaking of the knife, I really like using a serrated knife, a long one, for a dissection. You can use a scalpel, but they're really small and sometimes it's hard to make really proper cuts with those. One thing that's really important when dissecting a fish, whether you're inside or outside, is having a clean workspace and being able to clean up really quickly, especially if you have multiple classes to go to. I think one very critical thing is at least having two plastic bags, one to tape down on your work surface so that you're not creating a huge mess. And then you can have a second trash bag to throw all the pieces of the fish away and then remove the tape and then throw this bag into. It's just makes the process a lot quicker, a lot smoother. Another thing for staying sanitary, I don't personally use them all the time because I feel like I have better dexterity without gloves, but gloves are really nice, especially when trying to have children involved. They're never going to be cutting unless maybe you're working with high school students or maybe some adults for some reason, but gloves are really nice to have. You can give one to each student, and you can preface the dissection by saying they're allowed to touch things once they're in a tray of choice. This is the only thing they're allowed to touch. They won't be able to touch this section. And then somebody who's aiding you can walk around with the internal organs and let the kids touch them with their gloved hand. Probably make sure to have hand sanitizer, know where the nearest sink is, and also probably have a first aid kit. Definitely have a first aid kit nearby. I've never had anything bad happen. I've done maybe around 20 dissections, something along those lines. Haven't had anything happen, but always have to have safety first. And then just paper towels and disinfectant. Hopefully something that smells nice, something that'll get the smell out. Most people don't like the smell of fish, especially dead fish. So make sure that you can remedy that, especially if you're doing it in someone's classroom. If it's outside, it's not too big of a deal. Sometimes it's even best to bring your own table. That way it's kind of your own mess to clean up. Some last things to wrap up on. These fish are pretty amazing creatures. You definitely want to respect the fish and let the kids know that they should also respect the fish. If you're letting them touch organs, if that is something that your teacher and you deem safe, then let them know to not squeeze and destroy the organs. It makes a mess, but also, yeah, it's just not super respectful to the fish. Sometimes you can like squeeze the organs to show how blood can move out of them, but don't let the kids just turn everything into mush. This video will be quick. It'll be about maybe a half hour. The dissection can take longer than that. Know that the prep time will probably take at least 10 minutes, if not more, and the cleanup will take just as long. So you're probably going to want to pencil out at least 45 minutes for the full dissection, because you're going to want to be able to talk about everything in depth, and everybody will have questions, whether they're a child or an adult, so leave time for that. Yeah, and just have a lot of fun with it. Yeah, and here's the video.
Look what I found! Time to go process this bad boy.
Here's the chinook salmon. Today we're going to be teaching you guys all the insides and outs of this guy. This one has spawned already. We take samples from them to learn more about their age as individuals, which helps us as scientists figure out the entire salmon run structure as a whole more. And the purpose of this video is just to teach children in schools about these guys. And there are multiple types of salmon that we can run into out here, as well as other places in California and the Pacific Northwest. You can tell that this is a chinook rather than a different salmon because of these great large spots. Steelhead have much smaller spots, and coho have smaller spots, a little bit bigger than steelhead, but these ones are quite large to the body size. They almost look like amoeba. They're kind of irregular. They're not just dots like on other salmonids. Another easy way to tell is these amazing black gums and tongue of the chinook salmon. Coho have white gums and a black tongue, and then steelhead have an all-white mouth. That is one of the easiest ways to tell a chinook salmon, especially when you have a carcass. Chinook and coho are also taller per their body size. They're almost shaped like footballs, and steelhead are more similarly shaped to a torpedo. Yeah, so that's kind of how you can tell these salmonids when they're swimming past you really fast in the water. For this guy's pretty beat up, but when he comes out of the ocean, he's going to be really just an amazing silver color. Sometimes they can get a little bit of reddish hue on them here at the end of their life cycle. That's not super common for chinook all the time, but it's pretty common for coho. Yeah, so when chinook are here, they're kind of more this, like, they can be tan, greenish. That's pretty regular for them, and they kind of lose a lot of their skin and their scales as they've been in the streams mating. They have to climb up some pretty impressive stretches of creek and river just to get where they want to lay their babies. So for the outside of the salmon, one of the first things that you think about as a surveyor is that they're kind of slippery. They have slime all over them, and that is a great layer of defense against predators. If a bear tries to grab them, they really need those claws to sink in because they're just really slick. Another layer of protection they have is their scales, and both the scales and the slime help against fungal pathogens and other such things. Little things trying to like suck onto them. It's like our skin. Our skin's a really weak layer of protection, but the salmon has an even better layer. So for humans, we have arms and legs to get around and do things, but fish, they have fins. They have many fins on their body. They have pectoral fins up at the front, kind of like our pectoral muscles. Our pelvic bone's right here. The fish's pelvic bone is in a similar situation. Pecs, pelvis. This one always gets kids. This is the anal fin. It's right near their anus, also known as their vent. It's a urovaginal opening. It takes care of releasing their gametes as well as their feces and urine. And then the powerhouse is the caudal fin, the tail fin, which is right here. Females use this to make their redds, their nests, which there's one right here actually. It's a little hard to see, but and then also what they use to propel themselves upstream. And then they have the dorsal fin. This one's mostly used for steering. And then this funny little thing, which we as scientists use to tell if a fish in these parts is probably a hatchery fish or a natural fish, is the adipose fin. Doesn't really serve a functional purpose. That's at least what most scientists believe. There's some research undergoing that, which is pretty cool. But if this is clipped, you know you have a hatchery fish. That's pretty neat. As scientists in the field, we take 3 biosamples from these fish, and we take them off the left side of the fish here on this district to just standardize our sampling methods. We take a fork length to get to see how large they are. This one looks to be 63 centimeters. That's a pretty decent sized fish. They can get well over 100 centimeters though, and they can be as small as 40 something centimeters. We take their scales right here because when you zoom in on them, they kind of look like tree rings, and you can age the fish if you've been trained. And this helps us understand what type of how long fish are staying in the ocean. Because chinook can live up to, I believe, 7 years, maybe even 8. But the average returning fish is 3 years old. But we oftentimes get 4-year-old fish and a lot of 2-year-old fish. I'm going to put that into this scale envelope. We'll take that back to our office and look at them under a microscope and take pictures of them. The next sample we take is a tissue sample. We're just trying to get DNA from the fish. We send this off to scientists at NOAA or UC Davis, somewhere, and then they look at the DNA of this fish. The third thing we take is the otolith, which is an inner ear bone of the fish, and it actually tells us a lot about the life history of the fish. Can even get down to the nitty-gritty of seeing how long it's spent in the river, how long it's spent in the ocean. It's pretty neat what science can do nowadays. So we open up the brain cavity. These are the occipital lobes. They connect directly to the eye. That's where they process their sight. Right up here are their olfactory lobes. Those help their nares. Salmon actually use their sense of smell to find their way back to their home stream from the ocean. And right in the back, I believe that is where their motor processes happen. That's how the fish, that's the part of the brain the fish uses to decide how to move its body around. And the otoliths are actually right back in here. There's one. They're resting in these pockets right behind the brain. There's the second one. They're just little tiny bones, kind of like our inner ear bones. They help them balance, but scientists have figured out how to extract a lot of information out of these things, and they're pretty critical to telling a lot about the fish's life. We actually have a few more things on the external anatomy to talk about. The coloration of the fish, you can't tell too well since this guy's pretty beat up and rotten, but the idea is that they're really dark on the top, so if you're a predator looking down at them, you can't really see them. It's a very easy version of camouflage for the fish to hide in plain sight sometimes in deep pools. And then on the bottom, they're pretty light, so if you're a predator looking from below, when you look up at the top of the water, you see the sun hitting it a lot of the times, and it's pretty light, and this kind of camouflages them from below as well. The lateral line lets the fish know everything that's going on around them. They sense vibrations in the water through these cells because there's this little tiny opening that lets them know when water is moving around them at any capacity, and they can tell what's different between the stream flowing and when a predator or another fish is swimming right next to them. It's kind of like having spidey sense. Yeah, so the salmon have nice sharp teeth. They are carnivores, but oftentimes they don't use them for eating. It's oftentimes for male-on-male aggression. They're kind of fighting when they're spawning, chasing other males off. Sometimes males latch onto females. They do a lot with their teeth. And then on the inside you can see it almost seems like they have teeth on their tongue and way back in there. Those are called gill rakers. Those make sure that if they're eating a smaller fish, that they trap the fish in there and that stuff also doesn't go out to their gills and that the fish have a hard time swimming back out. Something that protects the inside is the operculum. It's great to compare the gills, which this is a pretty fresh fish. This still has some blood in it. Not all carcasses will look this nice. The operculum protects their gills, kind of like how our rib cage protects our lungs. Some kids and even some adults think that fish don't breathe oxygen, they breathe water. Well, the thing is there's oxygen all free in the water. It's called dissolved oxygen. And due to these very filamentous gills, they're able to grab onto that oxygen and bring it straight into their bloodstream. Where we take the free-floating oxygen in the air and we bring that into our bloodstream. There's a lot of surface area on these gills so that there is as much area as possible to take that oxygen out of the water that's free-flowing. And you can see the gill rakers attached to not let stuff come through the mouth, debris or prey come through their mouth and get into their gills, because that would not feel great. Great, so now we're gonna head on into the fish. Easiest way is to just cut straight from the vent all the way up to its head. It's a little tricky here at the pelvic fins. Be careful. Make sure you have a sharp knife. Oh, look at that, it's a female. Just saw some of its eggs pop out. I'm sure there's going to be more. That's kind of exciting. Wow. That's pretty special. Most of the time you don't find many eggs in a female. I couldn't tell that this was one because oftentimes their tail's a little more beat up. But, yep, here, this is the great way to tell if you have a female or male fish, if there's eggs present or they're expunged egg sacs, which kind of look like octopus tentacles to me. And you definitely know that this is a male fish, which the kids will ask you a bunch about these funny organs, which are the testes, which have sperm in them, but we call it milt in a fish, at least in salmonids. But yeah, this is how you tell if it's a boy or a girl. Sometimes it's hard to have that sex talk to kids you're teaching fish about, but pretty much just try to glaze over it as much as possible. The first thing at the top that I always like to go over is the heart. It's right here. I'm going to try to chop it out without messing anything else up. The gills up here bring oxygenated blood to the heart, just like the lungs do in a human or in mammals. Fish are a lot older than us, just as a lineage, and they have a more primitive heart, per se. Humans have 4-chamber hearts, fish have 2-chamber hearts. Yeah, this helps circulate oxygenated blood around the whole body, which just every muscle needs oxygen, and that's how we and all living creatures with muscles move. Kids oftentimes like seeing you drip a little bit of blood out of the heart. The fish's largest organ is their gametes when they're coming into the river, but for most of its life it is the liver. The liver is really important for excreting enzymes like it is in us, but just like in us as well, what most people don't know is that the liver contains a lot of carbohydrates for burning energy later when you don't have food in your system. This is really important for this to be large while the fish is swimming upriver, because they're not really eating a lot as they're trying to go back up to their natal stream and spawn. So, yeah, the liver is used for a lot of energy. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. Depends on how fresh your fish is or the carcass you got from a hatchery, but that should be the gallbladder. It's pretty much in charge of excreting enzymes. That's what the liver does as well. There are many things in not just fish bodies, but also human bodies that excrete enzymes. Okay, as we go in, this guy off here, kind of everybody thinks this might be a chunk of the liver or a tiny liver. It's actually the spleen. When explaining this to kids, it's easy enough to simply just say this is what helps them fight back against disease. This is their immune response system is built right in here in the spleen. It is also in humans as well. But it's a little hard to explain besides that unless you're getting deep into the nitty-gritty. Sometimes easy to just start by chopping out the GI tract so you can pull it out and start explaining it as a whole. So that is egg sac still. You can tell it has that octopus-esque like tentacle. You can kind of see where the eggs were nesting in there. This is the GI tract. You can tell that the salmon is not an herbivore because herbivores have really long GI tracts. Their stomach is really small because they're eating meat, and meat's really easy to digest. This tube going all the way to the vent is the intestines, essentially. Stomach's in charge of mechanical digestion, whereas the intestines are in charge of chemical digestion, where they're excreting those enzymes, breaking the food down, getting all those great carbohydrates, lipids, amino acid from all the food they've been eating. This funny thing that all the kids love to call the spaghetti organ is the pyloric ceca. Last time I read up on it, it seems like most people know that this excretes enzymes as well. It aids in digestion. It is directly attached to the stomach, but it seems like they're not super sure exactly its key features, what it does compared to the liver, the gallbladder, and all that. So now this is a really great example of the swim bladder. The swim bladder helps the fish stay anywhere in the water column it feels like, especially in the ocean where it can get very deep. This bubble right here, the air bladder, lets them decide where they want to be. Maybe they want to be closer to the top. Maybe they want to hang out down at the bottom. This is just where specialized organs that humans don't have. Fish do. And sometimes you can pull it out just like this, and it's a little balloon. It's really fun. The last internal organ that we go over is the kidneys. And it looks like one long strip, but there's actually 2 kidneys in there. And you can slice this open to get to them, and you can scoop it out. I oftentimes just use my finger. It's pretty easy to get it out of there. It's just kind of gunk, but you can get some solid pieces of it at times. Like that. That's pretty solid for as far as the kidney goes. Yeah, one of the kidneys is pretty much responsible for filtering the blood, and then the other kidney is mostly responsible for making new red blood cells and such. But another extremely important thing it does, which is why it's so large and spans the entire body of the fish, is that it filters stuff out of the bloodstream, just like it does in humans. And mostly what the fish needs to filter out is salt, because they live part of their life in the ocean. When they're born, they're in the freshwater, they're not having to deal with so much salt. But when they're in the ocean, salt can be extremely toxic to creatures, and they need to filter all of it out really effectively. And that's why it spans its entire body, just to get all those salts out of its system. One of the most exciting things we generally save for last is extracting the eyeball, which this is times where people tell kids, some people eat the fish eyeball. I personally love the fish eyeball. I think it tastes really great once it's been not raw, but when you've cooked the fish whole. Sometimes it freaks people out to tell them that. It's all about the wow factor with the kids. But something really cool that you can extract out of the eyeball is the lens. This is what helps the fish focus far or close. We have a lens in our eyeball as well. This is pretty tricky. Be careful not to cut yourself. I'm trying to extract it. It's really small. It's like a glass marble. Kind of like the size of a, I don't know, quarter Skittle, depending on your size of fish. But it's really awesome to get out if you can. I highly recommend it. There it is. It's just like a little glass orb. And this is what helps them focus on prey, on where they're going upstream, on predators, anything. I mean, without this, we would only be able to look at one distance, and one distance only. Same with fish. Yeah, there you have it, the anatomy of a salmon. Thank you, Mr. Fishy, for presenting yourself for science, and also having really cool, intact air bladder. Pretty excited about that.